Hello to all the viewers out there. Thank you for joining us for the TactiCon panel on creating a campaign for a strategy game. We're so thrilled to have all you viewers from around the globe and hope that you are strategizing on how best to enjoy all the events, panels, and of course the Steam showcase with over 100 amazing games at this year's TactiCon 2024.
Yeah.
I'm Amber Scott from Only by Midnight, and I'll be the moderator and participant in today's panel. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a bit, but first I'll turn it over to my esteemed co-panelists to introduce themselves. Vicente, why don't you kick us off? Tell us who you are, your studio, and a little bit about your current project.
Sure. I'm Vicente Ramirez. I come from Spain, from Digital Sun. We did Moonlighter like 5 years ago, and after that, the Mage Seeker, and I'm the creative director of Cataclismo, which is our third game. And yeah, it's a strategy game about building castles stone by stone.
Great, awesome, thank you. And Carl, how about you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your studio and your project?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, my name's Carl, and I'm the game designer of Lava Potion and our one and only game, Songs of Conquest, which is like an adventure strategy game where you lead armies and you gather resources and you build up your towns and conquer everything.
Excellent.
Right.
I like to conquer everything. I, as I said, my name's Amber, and my background is actually I come from tabletop role-playing games. So I started out writing for systems like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, and then I started working as a writer in video games. I wrote for Baldur's Gate, um, not that Baldur's Gate Siege of Dragonspear, and Icewind Dale Enhanced Edition. Now I work at a company in Canada called Only by Midnight. And our game Control Alt Deal is in development. It's a turn-based strategy game set inside a simulation game, and it has a scenario-based structure that's procedurally selected. So it's a little random what scenarios the players get in what order. And that's created a lot of really exciting challenges on designing a campaign mode, and especially in designing our demo, which is why I'm here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's kick things off kind of with the basics of what is a campaign or what is the purpose of a campaign mode in a strategy game?
Yeah.
Or put another way, like, why did you decide to make a campaign mode? Carl, maybe you'd like to kick off some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have so many thoughts about like campaign mode in games, and um, because we did a lot of work. Like our games is very much as like in the brand of like Age of Wonders and Heroes of Might and Magic and all of those games. And so for us, we were looking at like why do we want to make a campaign mode, and also it's like, well, one, we want to introduce the world, we want to like tell the story of the factions, and two, we were like, well, this will be a good way of teaching people how to play the game. And I think we were right in one of the two, because I no
Mhm.
longer agree with that campaigns should be used to teach the player. I don't think that's a good
Mm.
tool. After setting out to do that in our own game and having experienced it in so many other games, I think it's doing the campaign a disservice to use it as a tool to teach the player. I think the campaign should be just focused on having a good and fun experience, and then if that differs from like they say the base game as in our game where you can play like a conquest map which is just like conquer everything, or you can play campaign which is more story focused. I don't think the campaign part shouldn't be about teaching people how to play the conquest part. You should you should play the game and have fun, or like experience the story. So I've really changed my opinion on the matter when it comes to like what the purpose of campaigns should be in the game. Actually,
Wow, that's really interesting. Vicente, what do you think?
So for us, we use the campaign, or we want to use the campaign for two things. One of them is teaching how to play, which is just what what I was listening about. Fingers crossed, but yeah. And then the other part is to, we have a lot of world building put in Cataclismo about the scenario where everything happens, what we call the reigns. We have the hero, which has a storyline. We have factions and things like that. So we really wanted to have a vehicle to show that to the players. And the campaign was very, like the best situation because we are telling a story, and at the same time we are introducing gradually new mechanics that can be used on other game modes as well. But yeah.
Yeah. I'm a writer, so I always kind of go story first when I'm thinking about game elements. And I agree that campaigns are a lot about telling the story, setting up the world and the like kind of the context for the player. And I think really valuable uh, cause for having a campaign mode is to set some stakes. Like when you're playing in a skirmish mode and it's just the one map and then it's over, the one scenario and it's over, there's not really a cost to failure other than you've got to start over, and that's annoying. Once you've got a campaign and you have this bigger world and this bigger reason for the player to be in the game, I think that automatically creates this more investment and higher stakes. In Control Alt Deal, the game that we're making right now, we knew we wanted to do sort of negotiating and human relationships as like the mechanic. It's not a combat game, and there was a lot of interesting things we could do with that. But it wasn't until we really started coming up with the idea of okay, you're playing as we were trying to think of like where relationships and negotiations would be like really valuable. So we came up with an office environment, like a corporate environment.
So I was
And
looking at your game, just
yeah,
like the mechanics of doing that, and it's just like I
yeah,
was like, that's really cool. That's such a cool idea. Just like playing as someone trying to learn what human interaction is, or like it just
yeah,
I because I think like that's such a cool thing that you can do with games where you get to like like in movies you talk about like show don't tell, but in games I
mhm,
think we should talk about like play don't tell, right? So I think it's such a cool idea that you guys have because you can get to like experience that yourself. Sorry for like jumping in. I just got like
no, that's
excited
great.
by the uh
I love hearing that. And yeah, it's we wanted to show like look at the human condition from the point of view of a non-human protagonist, which is really common in speculative fiction.
mhm.
And so we came up with the idea of this rogue sentient AI that's trying to escape from the world's worst megacorp by creating alliances with all the like miserable humans who also are kind of trapped there. And instantly like higher stakes. Now it's not, oh, you failed the scenario. It's like, oh no, you failed the scenario and you could get deleted and the management's going to win. Like you don't want the managers to win. People got really invested in the story, and that was a really great thing to see.
I think that's a good point. With just to kind of keep spinning on this, like what's the point of the campaign? It's like I because what you're mentioning is that like we have like the skirmish mode or whatever we want to call it on one hand, and then we have like the campaign. And I think people get invested in those different game modes for two different reasons, kind of thing. Like you have like a story tell stake, or you have like an interesting scene where it goes, or like you care more about like like stakes as in but you care more about like the mechanism and the fun of the game in a way, or whatever you want to call it, like in the skirmish mode. And
Mhm.
I think it's like that's why I was like, I don't think you should teach one mode with the other mode. That was like my
Mm.
big like revelation where I'm like, no, if you have players who want to play both of them, which most players do, that's great. But a lot of players they just want one of them. So why should we like,
Mm.
oh, you want to play skirmish? Okay, first you have to play the mode you don't want to play so that you can learn.
Right.
Or if you did the other way around, it is a little to me it is a little bit strange.
Mm. With Cataclismo, we have an endless mode, which has a slightly different economy progress. So
Hmm.
you unlock content with its own system, and it can be played for quite a while because it's like huge procedural maps with random attacks and everything. And the campaign has different logic. It's more like smaller scenarios that are chained one to the other. So we're realizing that with the testings that we are doing and those things, that a survival game can take like 8 hours maybe until you are defeated because it's like long sessions. But in average, a scenario in the campaign is like 1 hour or so. So yeah, it's a different experience, and it has to
Yeah,
be a different experience.
it's just
Mm.
like more bite-sized and manageable. Like I'm the kind of
Mm.
player who plays a campaign in games like these, and I never touch the other mode usually.
Mhm.
or maybe I do it once. So yeah, okay.
That's amazing. I'm already feeling like so inspired and like, oh, I gotta think more about how we're using campaign mode. um, what about inspiration of different games? Is there a particular game that really served as like, I love the way they did campaigns. I love the way that they handled skirmishes versus campaigns, or maybe served as like a point of reference or inspiration when you were creating Vicent? Is there anything that comes to mind when you think about inspiration?
Absolutely. Yeah. We played a lot of Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2, sorry, back in the day. And I think that can be seen into the game because they have this structure with skirmishes, shorter skirmishes or average skirmishes, but then they have the varied campaign with hero scenarios and with city building scenarios and more narrative situations. And I think we kind of did a similar thing with a different budget and scale and everything, of course. But yeah, the general idea was that. And also Age of Empires 2, I remember playing that a lot as well, with all the historical campaigns they had and the settings and everything super well told. And I think that that's also an influence, yeah.
Cool.
What about you, Carl?
Yeah, I mean, I looked a lot at the Warcraft and the Starcraft as well because I think those campaigns are amazing, and they're just like you'd kind of be a fool to not look at them if you're making a strategy game and trying to make like a compelling story at the same time because they're really good. And I of course looked at like our kind of like predecessors for the game, which is like the Heroes campaigns and the Age of Wonders campaign and King's Bounty, those kind of things. But I mean, I looked at all sorts of. I like the games where you're kind of like forced to create your own story in your head when you're a player, where the game just like here you go, like Dominions, which is like a really small, ultra hard tactics game, but it's just super flavorful as well. Um, so it's a fun little mix, and it just creates these like you make your own stories out of it. So I was looking at a lot of games like that as well, just to be like, okay, can we do that? Turns out couldn't really do that, but like if there's no story that's actually being told in a way, then what story are you telling instead, like in your head? And there's a lot of games that do like stuff with like random events and like if you do this thing, then this happens, and that kind of like becomes the story. Like and it's just more of a seasoning story kind of thing. Yeah. So
We
those.
also played a lot of games as we were in prototyping, and in conceptualization, just seeing that's it's always so interesting to see what other people are doing and how they're interpreting, mechanics to tell their own stories or make their own games. A big inspiration for us was Inscription. Not maybe so much in mechanics because we're not a card battler. We use deck building in a very different way to create these relationships and so forth. But everything about Inscription was so focused on immersing the player in like the campaign that they wanted to have in the setting that they wanted, from the like creepy cabin to the lighting, the card art and animations, the voice acting, the bosses and everything. It it was like laser focused in creating this really specific experience. And going back to what I was talking about earlier about stakes, the stakes were like so high. If you just had these kind of creepy cards and you played a series of battles and you lost, you had to go back to the start of the map. That would be a cool game. But then you add all the environmental storytelling they put into the campaign, and it's like, what happens if you lose? I don't know. Do I get like turned into some creepy bone monster in this like haunted cabin in the woods? Like, where am I? And figuring out the mystery of like what's happening in this cabin. It really blew my mind. Like I couldn't stop thinking about this game. And I really wanted to create an experience like that for our players where you get into the game and you're like, I am somewhere else, and and I'm excited to be here, and I want to keep playing and see what happens next.
Cool. Yeah, I've ashamed to say I'd never heard of Inscription before, so I just had to quickly look it up when you mentioned it now.
It's
So
so
It's
good.
now I got another game on my playing list.
I also got obsessed when I played it the first time. It was like, what?
Cool.
I saw a review of Inscription and I started before I had played it and I started to read it. And the first paragraph was like, if you haven't played Inscription yet, don't read this review. Just
Mm.
go and play it first. And I was like, all right, reviewer, you've intrigued me. So I went and played it and I was like, oh my gosh, this game. But anyway.
Cool. All right.
Uh, all right. So we've talked about what a campaign mode is, some of our inspiration, like why we're interested in creating campaign modes. But coming up with a great campaign also brings a lot of challenges in design and development. So let's talk a little bit about that and what are some of the biggest kind of obstacles or hurdles that we faced in creating a campaign mode that's going to bring our players in and, hook them and interest them through to the end of the game. So, yeah, does anyone have initial thoughts on campaign challenges?
Yeah, I think we can go.
Yeah, go ahead. Jump on
Um,
in.
yeah, I think creating a campaign is such a tricky thing because you're not just creating it for one type of player kind of thing. Like um, if you have like as we do like a turn-based strategy game, because we both have players that will be super into like the lore and the feeling and all that, but then you will also have like the min-maxy math people who love strategy game, and I'm like one of them, and finding a way of telling a story that both at least will acknowledge, like they will understand the story even if they go like skip for every dialogue thing, and it's just like how can we make them understand what they're doing anyway, even if they're doing that. Maybe like how much can I set up the story by just the first line, like how condensed can we make those dialogues we don't encourage them to start skipping. So we actually started creating rules around how many lines of dialogue in the different kind of dialogue stuff. And then of course we didn't follow that all the time, but we just had these setups. It's just like, okay, no more than 3 here, no more than 5, and never more than 7. And unless it's like a ground shaking moment, then you're allowed to go past 7. And then when it comes to 7, it's always like the first line is high and the last line is die, because our game is about fighting. So then you have 5 lines of telling the little story there, and it makes you have to think way more like condensed in a way. Um, and I'm very happy with that result, even though it's just like, because I also think like creativity like thrives within like constraints, right? So if it's just like, yeah, it's 5 lines, that's what you have, like that's just dialogue, and you can't, like every line can't be more than 2 sentences, just like, and that's because we'll never be able to grab the super uninterested that just playing the campaign to do like the mechanics of them. They're never gonna read. But the people who are kind of like in between, who can keep them in the story, um, that's what we kind of like came up with, of a way of just like, so that they don't just go into skip mode.
Yeah, our game is
Mm.
very text heavy, and when we created a very short demo to do live at conventions, and the very first convention we did, people were just like, they'd pick up the controller, skip all the dialogue that I wrote, and just be like, all right, how do I play? And that was kind of a rude awakening
Yeah.
to really like rethink our con demo experience and our tutorial. Playtesting has just been a lifesaver on our project.
Mm.
Um, Vicent, what do you think?
For us, I think that there is a delicate balance between 3 points, which is the campaign pacing, like different types of scenarios and having variety on the experience as a global thing. Then the mechanic introduction, so we add content so the player doesn't get too bored. And then being sure that we are telling the story on the best possible way that we can do in the game. So it's a process, because it's as you were saying, if you put too much text, it's going to push away the people that is mostly because of the mechanics. But if you don't add enough story and world building, then I think it's not going to feel so good, because people will say, okay, I'm going to just go to the skirmishes, and if this is just a collection of skirmishes, why a campaign? So yeah, I think it's about the balance is the hardest thing. And also we had the help of Brendan Caldwell, which is he was an ex rock paper shotgun writer, and he's now into game writing as well. And he helped us a lot with the edition, like the making the final revision of all the texts and helping us to reduce the volume of everything. And I think that was super useful. And also at some point of the development, we realized that it was important to try to stop the gameplay the less that we could. So we minimized the camera movements in-game comics, because we have like these panels in the game that tell details about things that you can see in the 3D scene. And we tried to reduce those kind of events. And if that can happen while you're playing, then we realized it's going to be better. And as well, we added voiceovers, because that's a very good way to explain things to the player while he's playing without having to interrupt. So yeah, we did all those things ideally.
Yeah, voice
Mhm.
acting, that's really interesting. So
Hmm.
it's a different way for, I think, players to understand the content that's being presented.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
sometimes just hearing that being read out loud, I think it's a lot
Hmm.
different than just reading the word on a screen.
Yeah, we have the subtitles in a non too intrusive way, so it's compatible with all the rest of the gameplay and HUDs and everything. Because being a strategy game or having a strategy game, it makes like the screen tends to be filled with panels sometimes. So finding where to put the subtitles without overlapping with the HUD was also something to find out how to do that. But yeah, we have that. It's not interrupting the game. You can be listening at the dialogues while you are doing something different or just moving through the scenario, and I think it helps. Yeah.
Yeah, we face I love everything that you two are saying. I'm completely like on your wavelength. But we faced a definite challenge in that being scenario based. So in Control Alt Deal, you have to play a series of scenarios. Each one has a gatekeeper that is like, I want something from you. And it can be, I want a new coffee maker for this floor, or I want you to kick a hive of angry bees into my boss's office. Um, and then the point of the scenario is to figure out how to accomplish that goal. And coming up with a campaign mode or an overarching narrative when we couldn't be sure what the player had seen at that point because the scenarios are procedurally selected was a big challenge. And we went back to something you were saying earlier, Carl, which was the idea that the player will fill in parts of the story in their own mind. And if we could give them cues through environmental storytelling, the room design, so like all the little like pieces of paper or like bits of furniture or stuff, and what is that story? What is that set design kind of telling as the story? What are the sound effects like? What's that picking up? What is the visuals and the lighting saying to the player, and trying to like do as much lifting visually as we could, so that left some room for the player's imagination to grab onto and say, "Oh, I get it. I'm in this company. I understand who these people are. I get what the stakes are." And something that you said, Vicent, which was like having these elements not being intrusive and not being like taking up the whole screen or blocking the player while they're trying to play. We came up with the idea of these little storylets, which is while you're playing, two coworkers might, pop up and have a conversation with each other, and that happens on the side of the screen, so you can pay attention as much as you like, but it doesn't disrupt kind of the game flow. And then coming up with a framework for basically the beginning and the ending, and having these modular pieces in the middle that the player can interpret as they go along and try and like kind of tell the story in their own head until they get to the end. And then hopefully by the time they get to the end, all these elements add up to make a campaign that narratively makes sense. It's like a satisfying experience. But yeah, trying to tell a story where you're not sure what the player has experienced up until that
Well,
point. That was a challenge.
we have a very similar challenge in our game because like most of our like because we're playing sort of like a conquest game, so sometimes we play very like um I don't know the English word for it, but it's just like you go from one place and you go to the next. It's just like kind of like
Yeah,
walk
very
through the
linear.
path and the story will be told kind of thing. And you can't really like go the wrong way. But then a lot of our like campaign missions, you're just like, this is the map. Go wherever you want to. This is the story. You should like. So you give a lot of like player choice, and they can go around. And then if we're like, and that's where you run into a lot of like when you're trying to tell a story like as if it was a movie or a book or whatever, and you're like, okay, first this happened, then this happened. You're like, we don't know that. But this is going like we know these three things they will happen because they have to happen for the game to be like finished. But you don't really know a whole bunch of the other ones. Or maybe it's just like in our game as well, you control more than one person. So you're like, well, we don't know if it's like person A, B, C, or D who's going to confront these people. So then we're just trying to tell like an overarching same story, and then like make small little mini adjustments depending on all those things. And then when we have to, we force the player like to do certain things just to get the story across. But it is really hard to know. Like that's like the most common phrase when we're talking story. We're like, but we don't know if the player's going to do that, so we can't. And then it's also like game reality versus story reality, where you can't like, okay, and then the player will lose. You're like, but we don't know that. They might be really, really good. Like
If there's
they
one
might,
thing I've learned, it's don't underestimate the players. They
yeah,
will
yeah. It's
figure
just
out a
like
way.
you don't like see you, but if it's possible, one of them will do it. So then we have to have a story for that. So yeah, I think it's such a like a different way of looking at story than from other mediums.
Yep.
Yeah, my next question was going to be about how much narrative and story like telling you can fold into game design so that the player experiences the story in a strategy game. We're kind of already talking about that. And coming from a background that was tabletop RPGs, so writing an adventure or writing a campaign for, say, Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder, the biggest challenge was you do not know who the players are, and they don't have any limits in a role playing game, a tabletop role playing game. It's imagination based. You know, whatever they think of, they can do, uh, subject to what the game master says. But that's only subject to their imagination. So you don't know if the players characters can fly or that the dungeon master decided to allow guns in this game. Like you just have no idea. So it can be really overwhelming and you quickly have to narrow down like what I call it the parameters of reasonability. Where I'm like, okay, I can't know everything the players are going to do, but reasonably I can expect they're probably going to do like one of these 5 things or whatever. And that helps bring it down to sort of options that are going to make sense for the design. When I went to Beamdog and started working on the Baldur's Gate Siege of Dragonspear video game, it was actually a bit like of a relief because in a video game there's much more restriction on what a player can do. You
Yeah.
know they can't walk off the edge of the map. You know they can't find weapons that don't exist unless they're modding or something like that. And then that's not your responsibility. And so it has a lot more structure and you can be a lot more thoughtful about the options that you're going to present to the player. And I think that coming up with those parameters of what you can expect the player to do and then giving them options within it, that's where you get this magic spot where players feel like they have agency and they feel like the decisions that they're making are making sense and having an effect on the game. It's about understanding like the genre as well. Your players are going to understand that, I think. If they're playing turn-based strategy games, they probably play a lot of turn-based strategy games, and they're not going to expect like giant cutscenes or like romance options or something, because that's just not part of the game. And so by working with the players' expectations, I think it really helps you narrow down those narrative options and saying, okay, I'm going to work with you. I'm going to make a game that's fun, and we're going to tell a story together that you're going to like. Um, Vicent, what do you think about telling story as or telling a story
Mm.
as part of a strategy game?
I'm thinking about the general conventions about what you said. because it's true that after playing, going again to the references, after playing the Warcraft 3 campaign, for instance, you assume that you are going to have this kind of animatics, dialogues, and then tutorials and that kind of thing. And in a natural way, sort of, when designing the campaign for a strategy game, you kind of rely into that toolbox, I will say.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have the dialogues, we have animatics, we have environmental storytelling, like props put here and there because all the campaign is handmade. The scenarios are handmade with an internal tool. So those are not randomly generated, and we can put like a skeleton in a particular position somewhere, telling that there happened something. And we also have yeah, the rich descriptions. And I'm thinking because in other strategy games, I don't know if they have this. It's in the Dark Souls games, it's super common that you have an item, and if you select it and take the time to read the description, it can contain details about the world.
Yeah.
So we tried to have that kind of rich descriptions within the margins of the genre because you have limited space and you want to be focused on the gameplay, right?
Yeah, we're doing
So yeah.
a pretty similar thing as well. Like
Mm.
if you actually want to go around and read more things, there are more things. So yeah, I think it's a great way of just
Yeah, yeah, without compromising too much the general experience with, I don't know, branching dialogues or something like that, which
yeah,
could be cool, but then it will ramify the campaign in something probably unmanageable,
yeah.
at least on our game. Mm. Mhm.
Yes, definitely. I agree. We have a lot of that sort of bonus content in Control Alt Deal where you can inspect like a particular employee or a particular item that you find and you have like a little bit of information on it.
I was curious.
And
Oh, sorry. Keep going.
no, go ahead.
No, no, no. I'm sidetracking, so please go. Keep going.
And we did find because we've been doing a lot of play testing, some players are really into that and they'll like obsessively read every single thing and um some players just don't care. But we've also learned that if it is part of the game, if it's on the screen, somebody is going to be interested in it. You know, we can't have well, we can, but having just like a lot of random elements to click on or inspect is a lot of fun for some players, but it can overwhelm or distract them from the story.
Yeah.
And in our con demo, I was mentioning we had this live demo for players to try out if they came to our booth at a convention. It's the layout is our office building, so there's these computers and you tap them to draw cards. There's a fridge that you can tap to order food. And there's toilets in the bathroom. And if you click on them, you can flush them remotely. And that does have an effect in some games, in some scenarios. If somebody's in the bathroom by themselves and you flush the toilet automatically, they'll get scared. And you can create different like emotional effects that way. But having them in the con demo, people are like, you know, I'm here for 2 minutes to try out your game. Why are the toilets here? And so many players would go and like flush all of them to try and like unlock a secret or see like what would happen if I interact with every item in the map. And that was just a really interesting kind of thing that we found was how willing some players are to just inspect everything and see why is this here? What does it have to do with the world? How is this related to the story?
Yeah, and a very like common gamer thing is also like the achievement hunting. Like you just want to like I want to achieve a thing that is rare within this
Hmm.
game. So if I'm like walking up to test a game, like I'm not surprised if people are like, oh, maybe if I do all these things, I will do the special thing.
Something will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. I just got curious because we were talking about like text and stuff like this, and this is going a little bit off
Oh,
plan
please.
plan questions. But I was just curious how you guys are like. Are you working with translation at all?
Yeah, so that's another big challenge is we're a very text heavy game and thinking about localization is something that is at the forefront of our mind. So when we went into designing Control Alt Deal, we knew it was going to have a lot of like cultural context. So like workplace norms and stuff are going to be very different in different cultures.
Yeah.
And then it was going to be very text heavy. So that was going to be a challenge as well. So we went into it thinking we're going to have to put a larger portion of our budget toward localization than we would on
Mm.
maybe like an action game. And when we went and started designing like our Unity setup, we created a localization like input form to
I think we have
that
the same.
our lead
Like,
programmer did. It's just a CSV file with different columns for the different languages. And we do have some bilingual employees. We have one of our programmers is from Honduras and speaks Spanish. And we also have someone on our studio who speaks French. And so right away we went in when we had like one scenario, we started to do a Spanish translation so we could see early on where that was going to break and how we were going to handle it. So
yeah,
things
yeah,
like gendered nouns or like different forms of verb conjugations that don't exist in English. So
also like how certain languages just take up more room. So
yes.
we use a lot of like text boxes, right? But for our dialogues, and then it's just like, okay, so how big can this get now? And that's also like what we
Mm.
want to limit because English is fairly condensed. So it's just like, okay, so if it takes up this much, how much will it be like in say like German or like that tends to bloat a bit.
Chinese.
Mhm.
Or Chinese, which is
Yeah,
a
yeah,
whole
Chinese
different
is
layout.
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Like so much work for Chinese.
Hmm.
But yeah, we're using a similar system, I think, as you, Amber. We have a separate system. Like actually using like Google Sheets. So we're importing from there, and that's where we import, and that's where all the and then the localization agents they input it in a different program that gets to it there and so on. And then we put it in the game. But it's just like for me, like when because we work on different campaigns, say like 4 to 6 missions, and that's like a storyline, and then once that is done, like you need to get all the text to the translators, and they need to get that done, and that's going to take like 3 to 4 weeks, and then it gets back, and then you need to play test it again, and during that time, as a creative writer, you're like, oh shit, this is so much better, and we're like, yeah, but but could how much can we change? And the thing is, like, we can always change it and retranslate it, but it's just like, um,
And then going to what Vicent was saying
Mm.
about VO, if you're doing voice acting, then once you've
Yeah.
got the script and the actors, like you're done.
It's locked.
So
It's locked. Yeah.
oh yeah, what
We did all in, well, Cataclismo is a bit weird because it's the game, the name of the game as well. It's Cataclismo in all languages.
yeah,
But the thing is that they speak in English with a slight accent of Spanish, and then they have some words in Spanish through the game, which works like their Latin sort of. So finding a way to do the localization of that and finding the proper actors to record all the voiceover was definitely a challenge. But I
for
will say
sure.
that we are quite happy. And yeah, we localized the game to, I think it's 11 languages, like Spanish, English,
wow.
French, German, Japanese, Russian, Korean, Polish, all
Yeah, I
those
think
things.
we're something like 14 or whatever. It's just like it's a huge amount.
Yeah, yeah. And then on the technical side, as Carl said, we do the same. We have the spreadsheets that
Yeah.
communicate with Unity, and it goes all along that workflow. And once it's been recorded or the localization has been done, because some tutorials and text don't have the VO, then it's locked. And if you need to change it, it has to go again through all the workflow, and the production people is unhappy. So we try to avoid that.
Jesus.
Absolutely. Well, I
Yeah.
think this is a really good segue into our next topic. So we brought this up really early, and I knew we were going to come back to it. So I'm hoping we'll have a lot to say on the idea of using a campaign mode as a tutorial.
Mm.
So this, as we know, is very common. We talked about Warcraft 3, talked about, Heroes of Might and Magic. On one side of the design coin, that was a boring metaphor for a writer to use. On one on one side of the 4X terrain, the tactical 4X terrain, we've got campaign mode as narrative. So it's telling a story and creating these characters in the world. And on the other side, we can look at campaign modes as a way to hide kind of complex mechanics or hide the kind of overt tutorial or the onboarding. And this is another thing I have a lot of experience with in our game. But Carl, you kind of brought this up right at the beginning and said you changed your opinion completely on how campaigns can be used as tutorial tools. So why don't you share some of that with us?
Yeah, it's because to me when we started working on it, it just felt like that's what it's sort of for. Like, you know, you play the campaign because it's fun, but it's mainly there to teach you the game. So once you've done with it, like once you've, because our game is like very much like inspired by like Age of Wonders or Heroes of Might and Magic 3 is like one of the biggest. It looks very much like that. It plays very much like that. So we were looking at it and we are like, okay, so we want to teach the player how to play the game, so then they can play like the Conquest maps or the skirmish maps, like because that's
Mhm.
like the end goal of the game. That's what the game is. And so then like what we're talking, like we want to like introduce mechanics slowly and be like, we don't want to overwhelm the player, and we want to be like, okay, let's go step by step. So like in our very first map, it's just like it's about walking, picking up resources, learning how to fight. We don't give them a lot of magic. They get a couple of like, they don't build anything. It's just like, and you get introduced to the story and the lore, and it like it's a really nice mission. I think it's really nice and it's good, but it's showcasing very little of what's actually like fun with the game mechanically. So if you start playing the game and you start playing that mission, you're like, I don't know if this is a fun game, and you're not like super into story, and you're used to play like, because nowhere are we really saying, hello, this is tutorial. We're just kind of like assuming that people think that because it's a campaign mission. And most people do, and they're like, well, it's fine. It's the first campaign mission. This is what happens. Um, but I think we're kind of like doing ourselves a disservice there, because I think if we would have used that first mission and been like, we're just going to tell this story in as fun and as an immersive way as possible, and we don't care about like what mechanics we use, because that's what the campaign is about. It's about
Mhm.
like as fun of an experience as possible. And then if we realize that okay, people they don't understand when we do playtests and stuff like that, well then we have to work on our tutorials in a different way. And I've like really come full circle with this. And like I don't think we should look at campaigns, and especially like if you look at our game now that we're looking at the numbers of it, like between 60 and 70% of our players they just play the campaigns, and then they might play like skirmish a little bit, but campaigns is what's being played. So then we've been using campaigns to teach people to play a game mode that they never end up playing. And we're just
Mhm.
giving them, I mean, I'm very proud of our campaigns and I think they're fun, but they would have been even better if we'd be like, no, this is the campaign, this is the story. And later on, once we like taught the player all the stuff, we you know, we can kind of like turn it up. But why did we put those restrictions on ourselves? Like we should take it at a pace so that they can play the mission we want them to play. Like it's such a different thing than thinking we're gonna like walk them through this, and at the end of 4 campaign missions, they can go play like the real game. Um, and I
Yeah,
really think
that's
that's
very interesting.
yeah. And we also like we see that a lot from some players just jumping into the game and they expect to play like a heroes like game, which it is if they play not campaign, but they're jumping into playing campaign, and we're like, we're gonna teach you the game, and they're like, this game is just you just walk around, because they're not, you know, they're not into the story. So they're like, I was walking around and I fought some things, and it's really shallow. And you're like, I understand why you're saying this, because that's what the first mission is. And most people like this, and some people don't. And so it's just, I don't think it's bad to learn the game from the campaign. I don't think you should be like, don't do that. But I don't think the game that the purpose of the campaign ever should be to teach the player. I think that is the wrong way of looking at what for many people is just that is what's going to be the game for them. They're not going to play the other ones. So yeah, that's my that's my rant.
Vicente, do you have some thoughts on
Hmm.
tutorialing?
Yeah. So
He's like so many
I
thoughts.
I was listening to Carl, and I think I understand the thing. Yeah, with Cataclismo, we try to do the onboarding of the game mechanics, but as I said before, we try to always to keep the balance between the experience and the tutorialization to avoid to be, to insistent on how the game is played and everything. But since we tried the campaign to be accessible and a way for people that never played tactical games to enter in even the genre, the first level, for instance, is going to be like very basic of this is how you select a unit, this is how you move a unit, this is how you rotate the camera, and that kind of thing. So I can see the problem with veteran people trying to approach the game and realizing that it's mostly the first level is walking around, but at the second level we start with building already, and because Cataclismo has this vertical building element where you build kind of with Lego pieces a lot, and I think we are presenting that quite early into the campaign. So hopefully it will allow people to realize that it's not just about having short adventures and things like that, which is definitely a risk. And yeah, also different player profiles might have different expectations and necessities and requirements for the campaign. And we tried to module that into 5 different difficulties. Like you have the super accessible story mode and also the hardcore nightmare mode and everything. So because we tried to, as I said before, we tried the game to be accessible for the most people that they want to play. And also you can just skip the tutorials. Without the begin at the beginning of the campaign, you can say, I don't want to see any tutorial, and we are not going to interrupt you with any pop-up about anything. So you can just explore and go around. We'll see. We'll see.
Mhm.
We should talk again 6 months from now.
Yeah, our development, it's always moving forward, always
Yeah,
changing.
yeah.
Um, yeah, we definitely faced a lot of challenges coming up with how to tutorialize Control Alt Deal. You know, it's not an intuitive game. It doesn't have mechanics that are very like commonly seen. It's not a fighting game. You know, you can't just press A to swing your sword. And it's not a squad based or like unit based tactical game either. You can't just grab a bunch of units and send them somewhere. You're in an office and you've got cards, but there's also, you know, items you can use. So there was a lot of
Yeah.
information to convey to the player. And our first attempt at creating the tutorial was did not work at all. It was very, very linear, and it basically just said to the player, you know, click this button, now click this button, now click this button. Okay, you're done the tutorial. And then it dropped them into a complicated scenario, and our players had completely forgotten everything that they just heard. And there was, you know, there was no retention, and it didn't involve them in the tutorial, so it just didn't work. So we revised it completely, and I was really kind of hearing what you two were saying about um, using the story as a way to have fun and like tell the player what the game is about, not just this is the tutorial and it's separate from the main game. Because we found once we approached it from a story side, we started to bring in like different characters, give the player goals, give them a little more freedom in how they experimented. We did break down the mechanics still. So the first scenario is, you know, quite basic, and then the second one builds on it, and the third one. But it still has enough complexity and story in each one that we've found it much more exciting for our playtesters and also just better for retention. So as they get through it, they're like, I remember how to do this. I know what I'm doing now. And what we're hoping is so instead of a tutorial, we're calling it the first act. So like act 1 of this game is this part of the story. And it's Scout, who's our little hero, you know, waking up and learning about the world it's trapped in and what those stakes are, why it wants to escape, and meeting some of the people in the office, and setting the scene for Act 2, which is the main part of the game, and then Act 3 is like the finale where Scout makes its attempt to break free. And this also has another advantage in that it sets us up for a sort of new game plus mode, where if you've gone through the game once and you're successful, then you can start a new game and skip Act 1 and go straight into Act 2, where you've got a new, maybe group of scenarios that you haven't played yet. You can experiment with making different choices than you did the first time through, and you know, work your way to a different ending, because we've got sort of multiple different story endings at the conclusion of the game. And approaching it from that story structure, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, I think was a big advantage to us in creating the tutorial as and integrating it as part of the campaign. Oh, lots of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to be like clear, I think even though I'm like, I don't think the campaign should be the tutorial. I don't think you should start at max complexity with the first. You should like, I think, really depending on like, of course you're gonna start building up, but I do think that it's a trap to think that this is the tutorial. To understand a game, you need to play this.
Yeah.
So it's just like, well, what if what if you skip past all of it, and what if like it's not. I think that's my main gripe, and now that I'm working on like, because we, as I said, like in our game we have a bunch of like different campaigns, and the more of them are. So the first one is like that's what we intended to be our tutorial, and then the more we make them now, I'm like I'm just gonna make sure they're fun to play.
And it creates a division, right? Like it creates a break in the immersion if the player's like, this is the tutorial. And on our first experiment, that's basically what it is. It was like, hey, here's the tutorial. And players are like, all right. In their minds, the game hasn't started yet.
No.
And that doesn't help them get into it. It doesn't like immediately hook and engage them. So
But I do think that that's actually like better than the option that like we sort of went for. We've fixed it a whole bunch because we were in early access a lot, but like we didn't like, and we just assumed that the player would understand that this is the tutorial, so things are going to be very simple. But then like what we encountered instead is because we're not like showing the game, people are just going like, well, the whole game is simple. Like I don't want to play this. This is too like nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like by stripping a bit away, like by not showing what was to come and so on, um, because we wanted to keep it simple. Instead, we made people think that this game has nothing to offer. So it's just like you want to make sure to show what could come, kind of thing.
Yeah. Also, I think that making the actions that you do during the levels of the tutorial all the parts of the levels that contain part of the tutorial, because we introduce mechanics gradually during all the campaign. It's also going to help the player to learn how to use the mechanics because they have significance into the game. Like you're doing something for a purpose, so it's easier it should be easier to learn and to remember after when you need to do that again. So yeah.
What do you guys think about like it's not used that much anymore, but it was used a lot a while, which was just like you start by doing like an end game thing. Like if you're playing like a superhero dude, you get to play like the final fight a little bit. So you get to experience all the cool powers first, and then you get kind of like thrown back in time 10 years earlier, and then you like play. And that was really popular for a while, and you can see the purpose of it. It's just kind of like this is how cool the game will be, and now it does. Um, and that was my experience as a player. I'm like, oh, so that
yeah.
So I was just curious, what do you guys have any thoughts on like that as a method of like mini
Hmm.
tutorial showing where the game will go, kind of thing?
I think it's depending on the genre, because for a strategy game, we tend to have a lot of things going on at the same time,
Mhm.
and the starting from there might be super overwhelming. But I'm thinking on an action RPG or like the Batman games or some that games in that genre having like this power push just when you start playing. I think it's interesting because it can hook the player. But for a strategy game, probably, well, it depends a lot on the game. But I'm thinking on Cataclismo, on giving the player a whole city with the hero fully developed, all the powers, all the units and everything. And I think it can be too much.
Yeah,
Yeah, I agree. That's for an action game. I think it would be easier, and a strategy game maybe not so much. But one thing that narratively, I mean, that's really common to have to show the hero or the protagonist, in this position of power, and then right at the beginning of the movie or the TV show or whatever, they fall, and now they've got to like build their way back up. And that's something that viewers kind of like to see this struggle to reclaim all this power that they had. It's something that you can think about, I would say in like opening cinematics or trailers showing what the game could be, and then players are like, I want to get to that point of the game. And being clear that they will be able to reach it and it's not, fake gameplay or something. And in Control Alt Deal, one thing we sort of thought of to communicate to the player is we want to have basically a card encyclopedia, and as you get cards that you add to your deck to take these actions, they get added so you can go and reference them. If you're like, I forget what this card does, you've got like a menu that shows them, and we can have blank spaces where more cards are waiting to be added, and that tells the player, oh, there's going to be more. I'm going
Yeah.
to get more complexity and more actions as the game goes on.
That's a great advantage.
Mm.
Sorry to
Um,
interrupt.
no, that's great. We also had to think, going back to what we were talking earlier about environmental storytelling, and I'm a writer, I always default to words. So part of this development process was, what can I do instead of words? How can I tell the story with art and with sound and stuff? And that was one of our design principles too, is how can we tutorialize without talking to the player? Without having a character come up and be, to do this, you have to press this button. And some things that helped was designing with the controller first. We knew we were going to do console ports eventually. So having our first playtest be with the controller, it limited the buttons that we could have available to the player. And it kept us from having 17 different combinations of keyboard commands. And thinking of accessibility first as well. So we knew, for example, we were going to want to have key remapping as a feature to offer to the player. So we couldn't have a character come out and say, to do this, press E, because maybe they've changed, their settings. Maybe they're on a controller. And so by using symbols, colors, though we try and stay away from colors as a symbol because for accessibility options, again, there could be colorblind players. But symbols for sure, shapes of cards, glow effects to, point to where important things on the map are. Anything that we could do that wasn't directly talking to the player to help them learn how to play the game, we tried to go in that direction first and then use words as like a backup.
Yeah, I think that's
All
great.
right. Yeah. So, great discussion. So excited to be here talking to the both of you. We'll go into sort of final thoughts in a minute here. The last question I had before that is the idea of campaigns being longer than skirmishes. So being in a campaign mode where you want to engage the player for multiple hours rather than an individual skirmish. How do you keep the player engaged? How do you hook them? How do you maintain their interest throughout? How do you make them like happy and satisfied when they get to the end? So I was just curious, what are some of your strategies? What are some of your thoughts on that sort of process? Maybe Vicente, do you have something to say about the player
Mm,
engagement in campaign mode?
yeah, I think it's because Cataclismo we have the endless mode that I told before. We have the campaign, and we also have the skirmishes, which are shorter scenarios. And for the campaign as a global experience, I think the thing that makes the player invested on it, or that can make the players invested on it, is that you have general progress. So in one hand, you have content unlocked because you know that each scenario that you play is going to have something new to tell you more about how the game is played and to learn more about the world and everything. Then you have the character storyline, which is also the story that is happening in the game. And you have the progress, the power progression, because all the scenarios of the campaign in Cataclismo happen around a war table, which we present kind of on a first-person view of the character that you later on play, like your avatar in the game. It's all undirect control, like any other, like Warcraft 3 and that kind of games. And in that war table, you have a knowledge, a progress tree, where you can spend the currencies that you earn by completing the main and secondary quests on the scenarios into developing more your character, your troops, your buildings, and everything. So I think that kind of combination between having new things to do, visiting scenarios that are handcrafted, having the story on the background progressing gradually, and then the feeling of progression. I think all those should combine into making the experience enjoyable. Also, we have, and this is unique for the campaign because it's the only way where the only place where we have the story. We have the comic panels through the scenarios. So if you want to see the comic panels, you have to play through the scenarios. And we have animatics, which are, it's kind of cinematics, but with it's static images following the comic language as well, with full voiceover and everything. So if it's just to see the art and the 2D illustrations and everything, that's into the campaign, into the story as well. So yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
Mm. It's because I think that the motivation to play the different game modes is sort of different. So if you want to go to dive into the world and to learn about the game and the setting and everything, it's the campaign. And if you want just the mechanic exploration or the challenge, then you have the skirmishes and the endless mode. And if you want, because we have the level editor tool, our level editor tool it's in the game as well. So that's not a game mode, but it's a mode that can generate more content for the game. So and that's appealing to another part of the player, I think. So that
For
kind of.
sure. That's really cool. Thank you. Uh, Carl, what would you like to add about keeping player engagement through the
Yeah.
story mode
Yeah.
or campaign mode?
A bit. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with like you really need to like mix like story and like mechanics and unlocks and I think it's really important to work with like achievement mentality through the like the campaign missions, feeling like you're ticking boxes, you're doing things kind of thing. Um and I think the more unique handcrafted experience you can give through the campaign that you won't be able to get like on say a skirmish equivalent like experience of the strategy game, I think the better. So it's just like you want this experience to be special, you can only have it like playing the campaign is almost a different game kind of thing. It's the same game, but it's just like you get to experience things that you don't get like on the skirmish maps. So I really think like you kind of need to like embrace the opportunity that you can use where you really like you can push different things, you can create different interests, and it's not just about like if you want to learn the story of our world, play the campaign, but it's more like if you want to like play a more cinematic version of our game, play the campaign, or like a story focused where it's just like because stuff will be blowing up or like you'll be teleported. It's just like other things will happen that can't happen on the campaign map, like on a skirmish map when you play it like that. So, but when you play the campaign, more interesting things can happen and you'll be surprised and you'll be delighted and have different player experiences. I really think that you shouldn't just take like the normal game mode and add story. I think you should be like, okay, so this is the story and this is the game. So how can I like make them into a thing in that case, like so that you don't just do one thing? Because I don't think players will keep on playing even if the story is good if they're just like, okay, the only thing I'm playing is a watered down version of the real game. Even if I'm interested in the story, I'm more interested in the game. Otherwise, I'm going to go watch a movie, read a book, watch TV. Like, yes, the story is interesting, but it's going to have to be really, really interested if it's going to make me play the watered down version of the game kind of thing. So I think what you need to do instead is like a different or a heightened or like a maximized version of the game is the campaign kind of thing. And then like the pure version of the game is the skirmish.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it always comes back to the writing. And right at the beginning of our panel, I talked about the idea that creating a campaign mode creates stakes for the player. They understand that the hero is going to, face a loss of something if there's failure in the game. And coming up with Control Alt Deal, we we were really leaning on the idea that there's a lot of people out there who don't like their jobs. They don't really like working, that they don't like corporate life. And it's kind of a really easy to understand setting where people start playing and they go, "Oh, I get it. This is a terrible place to work." And that creates an instant sort of, I'm on the side of the good guys here. Uh, I don't think we've had any playtesters who are like, I want the like heartless megacorp to win. They may have more, different ideas of how to go about the campaign, which is something we did want to offer, like these options. But they get into it and they understand where they are. And I think that's an advantage too that tactical strategy games have, is that if people play tactical strategy games, they get in and they understand right away. I'm building towards something. You know, I want to build my strength. I want to build up my armies. I want to conquer everything, as you said. And that gets this immediate like hook into them where they want to get to the end of the campaign and see where it goes. And in our game, people want to get to the end. They want to see does it do they succeed? Does Scout escape? Does the evil Megacorp win? Or do they get deleted? And what happens to all the humans that are working there? Just because you're playing the non-human protagonist, still there's all these humans there, and do you take them along with you? Do you try and make it better for them, or do you just abandon them to their sad fate so that you can get free? And I think that's another key to maintaining that player engagement is having some degree of agency. If there's only one way through the game and there's never anything where the player can decide what to do, then it becomes similar to watching a movie. It doesn't get interactive.
But
And I
again,
think in
some
a
movies.
yeah,
Sorry to interrupt.
no, go ahead.
I really, really agree with you about that. But
Oh,
then
okay.
sometimes we're just kind of blown away with some games that just they pull it off.
They do, yes.
It's really cool. Sorry, I was just like, yeah, keep going. Sorry for bumping.
I I guess when I say agent, it doesn't necessarily mean like, the player can change the whole route of the game or that the game necessarily has to have like, 16 different endings. But that the player feels like they're involved in some part of the game,
Hmm.
whether it's your troop tactics, whether it's deciding, to take this um, marker before you take that one. For us, we do try to reward innovation and have it's always a challenge. You don't want to spend 90% of your development time building something that only 10% of your players are ever going to see. Some games with large studios and budgets can really pull that off. For a small indie studio, we have to be a lot more judicious about where we put our resources. But trying to think just a little bit outside those parameters of reasonability and say, okay, most players are going to do this, but if they do, flush every toilet in the bathroom, or if they do
Yeah,
put these, people together with this item, we should have at least like a little acknowledgement.
yeah, no.
And that's been something that's really fun for us to sort of develop.
Yeah, we did that a lot as well. Just like, what if they do this, and then instead of seeing that as a problem, we saw that as an opportunity instead. And like you, most of the times you say you can't put 90% of the time for 10% of the things, but you only have to put little things in there. And we have so many players that are just like digging, 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 and they're like, what if I get this guy over there and they do the thing that? What happens then? And they get like 3 lines of different dialogue, but they're very pleased because they got like to
Mhm.
experience the thing, and they do like they find something else, and it's just like, and I really agree with you about the 90 putting like where to put the energy is like where most players are, but just as you say, like what if you flush all the toilets? Like as a player, you'll be happy with just something, really.
Yes, anything.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, And another thing we found with our convention playtest, our convention demo is so it's a very, very simple stripped down scenario, with very limited mechanics. Because they're at a convention, they're busy, they don't want us to sit and play your game for 30 minutes. Although if they do, that's great. They want to play for a couple minutes and move on. So the scenario we came up with was one of the human office workers is really hungry. She hasn't had gotten to have lunch yet. So you can snoop on her, which is the key mechanic in the game. You sort of spy on the human employees and go through their browser histories or their emails or whatever, and learn who they are, what motivates them, what their likes and dislikes are, what their relationships are. So you snoop on Laura until you find out her favorite and her least favorite foods, and then you order her something to eat from the refrigerator. And there's like little complications and stuff. But there's no restriction on what the player can order. They don't have to give her her favorite food. They could give her her least favorite food, or they could just give her something random. Like it's up to them. And what we found was most people gave her her favorite. A lot of people, the majority, gave her her favorite food, but a significant minority gave her her least favorite food because they just wanted to like be
So, yeah,
jerks or they just thought it would be funny. Or there's actually one we had a couple, like a husband and wife playing, and she was like, I'm gonna order her least favorite food, and her husband was like shocked. He's like, why would you do that to her? And she's like, well, how do I know she's a nice person? Like, maybe she's like a horrible manager. And they were having like a little argument about it. But what we found was that almost no one ordered her a neutral food, like that one that she neither liked nor disliked. Very, very few people did that. People wanted to make a choice, whether it was like a positive or a negative. Um, they wanted to be the decision maker, you know, and which was a little sad for me because I thought the neutral food choice dialogue was the funniest, but so few people got to see it. But yeah, that was a real eye opener for us, where we were like, people, whatever we do, we're gonna have to put that option in there for the player to make their choice, because that's what they want. They want to be involved. They want to have that agency. Cool. Wow. Great stuff. I've got one more question for each of you, and then I want to get your specific take on, and then we'll move to final thoughts. Vicent, we talked about this a bit already. You've got your endless mode, you've got your campaign story mode, and um, do you have a skirmish based kind of mode too
Yes.
for Cataclismo?
Yes.
And so for the three of them, you talked about having different player motivations.
Hmm.
So how do you approach each of these modes to create that engagement to hook the player, and like thinking about the campaign mode, but also the other options that you have
Mm.
to to really bring the player into your world and keep their attention through the game? Um, just recap or
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about more how you develop that.
Hmm. Well, about the campaign, as we already said, we have in Cataclismo there are a lot of things relating story, right? Like the progress and all those things. But for the other game modes, skirmishes, it's like the core gameplay with all the natural economy and the progress as presented during the campaign, but it played like contained challenges. You have to survive because Cataclismo has this tower defense-ish element where you have to survive against swarms of enemies that attack you during night. So in the skirmishes, you know that it's like a challenge. You have to survive 4 nights. The map is limited, and you have to really master the game mechanics and put them together in there. And it's presented like a challenge, right? And that's why it's also connected to the level editor, so other players can generate that kind of challenge for other people and upload them to the Steam Workshop and everything. But then we also have the endless mode. And for the endless mode, because it was appealing to have this kind of experience where you just build a huge fortress and you have the time to do it, because usually on the other game in the other game modes you're kind of running against time and you have to
Right.
survive an amount of nights, so you have to prepare for the final swarm or that kind of experience. But we didn't have that build the biggest thing you can do and try to survive against any amount of enemies. And we tried to aim for that for the endless mode, and we realized that it was almost a necessity to have randomly generated maps, because otherwise you play one time in a big map, because these are the biggest maps of the game, but the second time you already know where everything is, so the experience is not fresh anymore. So we decided to add the procedural generation for that game mode, and it has that feature, and it's only for that. Maybe during the early access we will try to, well, maybe no, we are going to improve it and we are going to add more biomes, because the game has like 3 different biomes, and for the early access we are only starting with 2 of them. We are getting ready the third. And for the survival mode, it's only the endless mode, sorry, it's only one biome for the beginning. Later on we will add the second one and maybe even more features, because we realize that that game mode, it's kind of trusting into the replayability
Mm.
more than the campaign. For the campaign and for the skirmishes, the skirmishes are just challenges. So it's more about having different experiences and putting yourself to test. And for the campaign, I will say that regarding replayability of scenarios, what we have is the secondary quests. You can complete a scenario with just the main quest, and the story will progress, and you will unlock the next scenarios and everything. But if you want to do it to do everything and to unlock everything on the knowledge tree, then you have to play all the secondary quests as well. And some of them have a parallel storyline with other characters that are not there anymore and things like that. So yeah, I think that we have these different features and approaches for each one of the game modes. Trying to satisfy the what we expect to be the necessities of the players that will try those modes.
That's really interesting, and it goes back to what we were talking about with the player filling in story in their minds and how much players build their own narrative. When you first mentioned the endless mode, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I don't think I would personally ever play that because I like to have a story with an end, but I could see how a lot of players would like it. And then as
Mm,
soon as you said, you can build like the biggest thing you want or like make your like coolest ever, fortress, I was like, oh yeah, I could do that. Like I could just
mm,
design my own, perfect fortress and build it as huge as I could. And I immediately like got interested and started building
mm.
like the story in my head, which is kind of funny.
We realized that since having and doing the focus groups and everything, we realized that since we have this Lego building mechanic, which involves a lot of creativity. There is a lot of people that is going to approach the game because they want to build a castle their own way and not be too bothered with the attacks and the enemies and everything. So we have this difficulty mode, which is I think it's called story in the end, story mode, but that's also available for the endless mode. So you can play like a lot of
Yeah,
different nights
it's
and
almost
be
like a build
just,
mode.
sorry?
Mhm.
It's almost like a build mode.
Sort of. Well, we have the level editor when you can create whatever you want, and also there is a sandbox mode with just a flat scenario and all the pieces. So you just can toy around with the constructions and create your blueprints. That then, well, we have those blueprints that you create in any of the modes are shared through the different modes.
Oh, cool.
So
That's
going
cool.
back to the creativity and things, you can go into sandbox mode, create a cool tower without the time pressure, and then go into a skirmish, try to collect all the resources that are required and to progress up to the point where you unlock all the pieces, and just put your blueprint in there, and it's the cool tower that you invested, I don't know, half an hour or thinking about it.
Oh, what a good idea.
That is awesome. Very, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. Carl, will go to you next. So your game is Songs of Conquest, that's right?
Mhm. Yep.
And there's a like a bardic component, right? There's a bard character whose
Yeah.
song serves as the sort of transition between each level. First of all, that's awesome. I love bards. I'm a huge
Thanks.
bard fan. So can you tell us a little bit about that mechanic and like what was the intent? Does it sort of recap what the
Oh yeah.
player's doing? Does it communicate
Yeah,
more story
yeah,
elements?
yeah, very much so. So it's um all our campaign missions are songs. That's the thing. So you play verses in a big song. So after you play like song one, which is like Song of Stoutheart, it's called. You play like the first verse, and once you've played it, you cut to the tavern, which is where you sort of like sit and you listen to this song, and then you get to hear the song sung for you, and what you hear is what you just did. But you hear a bard singing. So if you were like um, you went up a hill and you killed a dragon, then the bard is gonna sing that's what's happening. And I mean, for me personally, I have a background in like theater, film, and musical and stuff like that. So I get to be the bard and I get to sing the songs that I wrote. So it's personally, it's a really fun part of my job that I still get to like write music and sing songs. But it for a lot of players, it's almost like a little bit of what we notice. Like a lot of them are a little bit like shocked by when it happens because usually you don't like put actual singing in games that often.
Mhm.
So a lot of them are like, "Oh, this is kind of cringy. What's going on?" But most of them really get into it after like two or three because it comes after every like mission, and then they're like, "All right, yeah, okay, cool." And then so now we have like a lot of people who are like they've cut together the whole songs and they put them up on YouTube and stuff like that, so you can like listen to the whole thing and watch all the video connected with it. And so we have like the whole campaign are 4 songs basically, so it's like 16 different verses. And yeah, the idea of it was just to make the player feel more epic, really. One thing, and the other one was give a recap to the clickers. So you just played this, but you don't really know what you did because you played the game and that was fun, but you didn't want to read all the stuff. So then you get to see the little video, you hear someone singing about like, oh, okay, cool, that's what I did. All right, good, moving on. And hopefully as another way of being like, okay, maybe now you're interested in the story. Like maybe you'll stop, maybe you'll read a little bit more now. So that was pretty much the idea of it. It started as just like a little small thing that I wanted to do. And I just kind of like pitched it like, well, like the loading screen between the campaigns, could we have that as just like some sort of like a little image of what you just did and then hear the song and just like, if you as a player understand that it's the song, then cool. If you don't, that's fine. Let's just. But then, of course, that was just like we amped that up to like max, so now it's like a big cutscene thing with lots of pictures and big composition and everything. And it's like a huge part of the game, like unlocking the songs.
That's fantastic. I love that.
I,
We
I,
have
I love I love that
we
is
have
the name
our
of the game.
Yeah,
yeah, Conquest. We
yeah.
have
So
our next game. We just started prototyping as the next game that we're going to go into production on once Deal is released, and it's got a music sort of based component. So I'm
cool.
very excited
Yeah,
for that.
we're
Yeah.
ready. I love
Uh,
music things.
yeah, it's cool. Um, so informative, great discussion, super fun. Before we wrap up, does anyone have any final thoughts? Vicente, is there any like last message you want to leave with the viewers or Carl?
Mm,
We cover everything.
I think so. I think so.
I mean, I could keep talking
Yeah.
forever. There's so much. I'm
I mean,
like, oh,
for
I
me,
could
like
talk about
writing
this.
for campaigns and for games, because I did a lot of like, I got a background in normal like entertainment, like film, TV, and theater, and then I think the coolest thing about like writing for video games or like computer games is it's a totally different like talk and discussion about it afterwards. Because different players have like you can have people like discussing and talking about a TV show or a film or whatever, but in they've sort of experienced the same thing. So sometimes you can be like, well, I like this guy, blah blah blah. But just like reading on forums and reading discussions where people like talk about the story that you've written like in the game and what they think about it, what characters they like and why they don't like them and which ones they like and hate and how they're kind of like reasoning and they're like, why do you think they did that? And then I think it's like it's such a like a huge part of what I like love about my job now. It's like to go into and read the discussions about what they're talking about this like because it's such a they're so interested in a very different way, like in that like very gamer like let's find out more kind of thing, like what you were talking, like what happens if you click it here, like is that going to give us more information, and they're trying like almost solve the riddle of the story. And yeah, it's just I think it's like players are awesome.
Players are awesome. I agree. Games,
Yeah.
it's such a fun medium to work in. I agree. It's an art form that's just really unlike any other because you have that interactivity.
Mm. That remembers on our Discord, because we have a Cataclismo demo and we also did a Kickstarter back in the day. So some people is
Mm.
already on the Discord playing the demo and everything. And at some point, we started seeing people discussing with each other about the best layout for the constructions and sharing screenshots. And as soon as we added the blueprints into the demo, they started sharing the blueprint file as well
Yeah.
with recommendations like this is going to work well for the rainy biome because you have roofs and then you can put units here and it's super nice to be able to have that kind of interactivity even with the community and the developer.
Oh, it's so cool. I find it really hard sometimes to not to just barge in and be like, yes, but have you thought about this?
Yes,
I'm
I
really
know. I just you sit there waiting, like I hope that they
yeah,
find this thing. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sad to say that our time is up and we'll have to wrap up here. Thank you so much to both of you for participating. It's been a
thank you.
great time. I'm honored to have shared this virtual stage with you. I hope the viewers are inspired to check out your games and your studios, see how the design strategies that we've been talking about here came out in practice. I want to extend a huge thank you to TactiCon, to the organizers, Hooded Horse and Fire Squid, for putting together this phenomenal event. And of course, thank you to everyone watching and participating from around the world. I hope you enjoy the rest of TactiCon 2024. Do check out the Steam showcase and happy strategizing.
Thank you all. Bye.